Hello everyone and welcome to another sweet vintage cube Oh wait, that's not what this video is. We're switching it up this week, or today, and we're going to do a pick order video. So there's not a whole, I've actually done a lot of research on pick orders and there's not that many that I've been able to find. There's one pretty sweet 2017 Reddit post that has a vintage cube pick order, and earlier on in my vintage cube career that was really helpful, so I definitely refer to that a lot. But I figured at this point I think I have a little bit more expertise than whoever wrote that, and I can come up with my own. So we're going to do a top 50 pick order. And I want to really emphasize that this does not mean, like, don't just always take the highest card on this list. Context matters. And so, for example, I had one draft where there was a Mystic Confluence, a Jace Prodigy, and a Force of Will all in one pack, and then also a Thalia. And that was the only white card. And I took the Thalia, even though that would be lower than probably each of those three cards on my pick order, because it matters the signals that you're sending. It's not the most important thing, but it does matter. And so you really do need to consider the context of the pack, like what else you're passing, what signals you're going to be sending to people down the line. And so, again, just do not just always take the highest card on this list and assume that will lead to the best results. Secondly, this is trying to maximize wins. That's not necessarily the best goal in Vintage Cube. Some people want to maximize fun and just go for crazy off-the-wall things, and I respect that a lot. But this is specifically if your goal is just to get wins. So if you really like doing Storm, there's no Storm cards on this list for the most part, and that's just because I don't think Storm is a particularly good deck if your only goal is to win. But again, that's not the only point of Cube. And then one other point that I want to mention, you may have noticed that I've done a lot of mono white drafts, and I do think that's potentially where I've gotten most of my trophies from. But there's not many, actually I don't think there's any mono white cards on this list. And the reason for that is that even though I do think it's an amazing deck, it's amazing because it's so open. The best mono white deck is much worse than the best deck of almost every other archetype, but you can pretty consistently get a mono white deck that's close to the perfect mono white deck. And so I don't really advocate for first picking those sorts of cards, because when they're good, you can get a great deck on wheels. And so I like to spend my first pick on decks that have higher upsides and are only good when you can sort of like get into them early, and then have the backdoor plan of, you take some of these sweet cards, often sweet blue cards, and then when you realize blue is cut, you move into mono white. And so again, the fact that there's not many white cards on this list doesn't mean I don't think white is amazing. I do think it's honestly probably the best color if your only goal is to win. But I don't think the way to do that is by forcing it from the first pack. I think from the first pick. I think the way to do that is to just notice that you're getting a fourth pick or fifth pick Thalia or Stoneforge and moving from there. So without further ado, I'm going to get into some honorable mentions. These are cards that did not make the top 50, but I think are generally pretty underrated and are higher picks than most people give them credit for. And a trend that a lot of these cards have is that they're good in multiple different decks. So first of all, it's actually three cards: Smuggler's Copter, Figure of Destiny, and Porcelain Legionnaire. These cards are all pretty low picks by a lot of people, I've found. And I think they're all great because they're all three amazing cards in mono red and mono white. In fact, they're one of your best cards in both of those decks, and those are just very good decks that, again, are open a lot of the time. So I don't really like to first pick a card that's only good in mono white or only mono red, but those cards are pretty good because you can first pick them and then sort of read the signals and sort of decide if you want to go into red or white from there. And Copter and Porcelain Legionnaire in particular are also good in just the Artifacts Matter decks. So I think those are very underrated. I see them go very late a lot of the times, and that makes no sense to me. In particular, Figure of Destiny, even though it's not an artifact, 1-drops are super important in both of those decks. So that's going to be one of your best cards in both of those decks. Secondly, Skull Clamp. Everyone knows that this card is good, but I think it is really good. And it hurt my heart that I could not fit it into the top 50. It's amazing in mono green, amazing in mono white, amazing in mono red. Just such a consistent card advantage engine in colors that don't normally have access to card advantage. So, like, any deck is better if it has a bit of card draw, and I think Skull Clamp is just a very, very broken form of card draw that can outpace even Ancestral Recall a lot of the times if you build your deck with it in mind. It's particularly good early because then you can change your pick order a bit to prioritize 1 toughness creatures. Next, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. I think this card is awesome because, again, it just fits into a lot of different decks. It's a great reanimator target that's hard for a lot of decks to deal with and can kill immediately. It's a good ramp target because ramp decks tend to struggle with tricky permanents, and exiling 2 permanents is a great effect for that deck to have. And at 10 mana, it's cheaper than a lot of the other Eldrazi, or it's as cheap as any Eldrazi. And it's also a decent Through the Breach or sneak attack target. It's not the best because after it goes away, like the 20 cards don't really matter, but you can often just sort of mill them out with that ability. So I think Ulamog fits into a lot of different decks, and it's good in all of them. So I think that's a pretty sweet card. Also, sometimes you can play it in like the big colorless ramp decks that are playing Thran Dynamo and stuff like that. Next, Karakas. There's basically no deck where I'll not play Karakas. It doesn't matter if I have no legends. I mean, I guess if I'm playing like Nicol Bolas deck with really stringent Grixis mana requirements, then I wouldn't. But any other deck, it's awesome. Even if you have nothing to combo with it yourself, it's super good interaction against a lot of decks. It's amazing against Reanimator, your best card, especially if you're monocolored. You can deal with Iona very easily with the Karakas. It's good against mono green with like Raphelos and Questing Beast, and just a really great card overall. I love Karakas, and it's even better if you have your own things to combo with it, like Venture or Ventilating Click. And then finally, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. I think this is one of the best red 4-drops for the aggro deck. It is just a hard threat to deal with, especially when they're already on the back foot from your cheap creatures. It deals a lot of damage with its burn, and it's good card draw. And it's great in red control decks, like blue-red control, where you can use the mana to put out Inferno Titan, or just use it as a consistent source of card advantage and removal. So I love Chandra. Again, not in the top 50, but an amazing card that I think is underrated by a lot of people, and people should generally take it more highly. All right, on to the top 50. These are all great cards, and so it's like a little bit dicey. I mean, I'm sure you could switch, 49 and 47 or whatever. Like, this is more meant as a general guide than like a strict, like, number 50 is worse than number 49. So keep that in mind as I go through all of this, and please don't be offended if you think that a card is like a few slots off of where it should be. All right, number 50, Thoughtseize. I think this card is awesome. It's super good in Reanimator, where it can clear the way of any disruption they might have, and you can even Thoughtseize yourself. It's great in like blue-black control or Grixis control. It's as cheap as a spell can be that's not free, and it's such good interaction. So in general, a lot of these cards are cheap interactive spells, and Thoughtseize is one of the best. It's, in my opinion, definitely in the top 5 black cards in the cube, maybe top 3. I mean, I guess I haven't done this, but you can go through my list and determine exactly where I think it is. But it's a great interactive piece, cheap, splashable, so great card. This next card is my one Tribute to Storm, and to be honest, it's largely on this list because I think it's also good in non-Storm decks. Sorry about that, but it is Time Spiral. Super powerful card. It's especially good if you have like High Tide or ways to double the mana and really abuse the untap effect, but it's also just great on its own. I mean, drawing 7 new cards is amazing, and sure, it's symmetrical, but the fact that you untap 6 lands and can immediately put them to use really gives you a big advantage. It's super sweet with something like Mindslaver, where you can take the next turn and just do, maximum damage with their new hand. And it's also amazing with Mind Twist if you just, immediately take out their hand. And it's also very good in green decks. I think that's largely why it's on this list. A blue-green deck with Time Spiral can be pretty sweet because you ramp it out pretty early, ideally draw more cards than your opponent, and then often you can just win from that position. If you can get a Crater Hoof into play, you have Natural Order or Plow Under or something like that. I mean, that won't win, but it'll just put them really far behind and make them less able to take advantage of their new 7 cards. So, symmetrical effect, but not really symmetrical. One other combo that I definitely couldn't talk about Time Spiral without mentioning is Narset, Part of Their Veils, or Leovold. These cards just mean that your opponent cannot draw more than 1 card, and so you play Time Spiral, you draw 7, they draw 0, or they draw 1. And that's just backbreaking. That will usually end the game unless their board is incredible. So really sweet combo that is not too hard to play around to acquire when there's multiple draw 7s and multiple things to stop them from drawing 7. In one of my more recent videos, I had Time Twister, which I think is quite a bit worse than Time Spiral, Time Twister and Narset. And there was some really sweet games, including one highlight where I played Narset into Time Spiral or Time Twister on turn 2, and we won that game. That's for sure. Next, this is actually 2 cards, Watery Grave and Underground Sea, just blue-black dual lands. I think they're essentially the same. The point is that you can fetch for them, and obviously Underground Sea is better, but that's very, very marginal. I think, in general, you can never really go wrong leading off with a blue dual land. All of the blue color combinations are good. The blue-green land did actually not make this list. It's just below. I actually made a list through 100, and then I'm doing a video of the top 50. And I think that's just because it is actually more important in the blue-green decks than other decks because you have stuff like Arbor Elf. But I think, in general, blue-black is just a bit stronger of a combination. And so that's there. It's a great card. You can never go wrong taking that. All the blue-black the Dimir cards are all great. And so that's good. And then blue and black both have just good interaction. Next, blue-white dual land. I like blue-white a bit better. This might be personal bias, but I found that white's Planeswalker suite and board control suite is just a bit stronger than black's, and I think it's a bit better of a complement to blue cards. And so I also, again, just have had a lot of constructed success with blue-white, so I may be biased. But finally, Fractured Identity is just unbelievably good. You'll see where that comes in my ranking later, but I'll give you a hint. It is in the top 50. And I think that card alone makes blue-white dual lands go up in value a lot. Next is Consecrated Sphinx. I think this is one of the best top-end cards you can have in any color. It just comes down and basically immediately draws 2 cards. They can sometimes kill it in their upkeep, but usually not, and at least on Magic Online, which is where you play Vintage Cube, a lot of the time, even if they could kill it in their upkeep, they don't have the stop. So something to keep in mind, put an upkeep stop if you have ways to deal with Consecrated Sphinx and you're playing a blue deck. But it just snowballs so quickly. And then you can even have your own combos with it. For example, you can use Dak Faden and make them draw 2 cards to make yourself draw 4, stuff like that. It's also a decent reanimator target. And it plays very, very well with Force of Will and Force of Negation, just because you can exile Consecrated Sphinx if it's in the early game, or you immediately draw into a bunch of cards and you can fuel your forces. So, great card. Next up is the blue-red dual lands, Steam Vents and Volcanic Island. I do think blue-red is probably the best color combination, as much as I wish it was blue-white. And the reason for that is that it just has access to great combos. You have Sneak Attack combo, you have Kiki Jiki combo. You also just have a good blue-red control deck. Red has a lot of very efficient interaction and some good threats like Glorybringer that pair very well with card advantage and that sort of thing that you find in blue. So I do like blue-red quite a bit, and I would take a Steam Vents over a Hallowed Fountain, as much as it pains me to say. Next up, we have Shiok Nightmare Weaver. I think this card is just busted. Frankly, I don't think it should be in the cube. It's just not that fun to play against, and it just is a frustrating feeling to be just run out of win conditions slowly, and it's hard to kill because it just goes to so much loyalty, and then especially if you get a Mox, just a turn 2 Shiok can really end the game on its own. It's also at its best against decks that I generally think are the best. Like, it's very good against control decks that are light on win conditions, and I do think those decks are very strong in general. And so Shiok is just a broken card. Again, not sure it's healthy for the format, but it is healthy for your win percentage, so you should usually take it if you can. That being said, if there's a Treachery in the pack, I would take that over the Shiok. Treachery isn't quite as frustrating of a card, but it's just broken. It's pretty much always a 2-for-1 at least, and it's one of those cards that just gets better and better the more powerful the format is. So in like a normal limited format, you can Treachery their 4/4, and that's pretty cool. But in this format, you can Treachery their Blightsteel Colossus, their Grave Titan, their Consecrated Sphinx. The targets you can get are just busted, and you have great ways to make use of the mana. So if you just go Treachery into some other busted 5-mana play, that's a massive swing that's just very hard to prepare for and very hard to play against. And then finally, it even has niche applications in Storm, where you can use it in High Tide deck and untap your mana and generate more than 5 mana, and so that's pretty sweet. So great card. I think in general, mind control effects are weaker in this format than in most, but still strong in any format. Or by most, I mean like they're better in Legacy Cube. They're probably still better in Vintage Cube than in normal draft. But Treachery is just the best of the best by a lot. It's free, it's card advantage, and yeah, just a sweet card. Next, Urza, Lord High Artificer. This is a card that has consistently risen in my rankings. I would not have made my top 50 at one point for sure, but I do think it's quite strong, especially if you have any synergy with it whatsoever. Just it can come down and make a lot of power for pretty cheap across 2 bodies, so it's good when you're on the defensive just as blocking, and it can also generate a ton of mana. It's at its best with stuff like Mirror Battlesphere, where you can just instantly make a million mana, and it's also a mana sink, which is pretty amazing. Sometimes you can just hit busted stuff with it, like an Ulamog or something, and you do get the cast trigger, which is pretty sweet. One thing to note is that you want to use it on your turn. I've seen some people just do it end of turn, and that doesn't make sense, because you can hit an instant, but that requires a lot of luck, and in general, and most of your cards are probably going to be sorcery speed, so also make sure you haven't played land when you activate, ideally, because the most likely thing you hit is a land. But just a great card that's risen in my rankings a lot, and I wouldn't be surprised if it continued to raise, and I also do think the mono blue artifact deck is a good one. Stay tuned because I'm going to go through top archetypes in a little bit and do a bit of a deep dive on each one, certainly including mono blue artifacts. Next, we have another tie between every blue fetch land. There's probably there's some differences. Like, again, I guess Scalding Tarn is probably the best, because I do think blue-red is the best, but not real differences. I think I would still take any blue fetch land over Urza, and I think I would take the next card over any blue fetch. Like, functionally, they're all the same, and they're all really good. They're just very versatile. They fit into any blue deck, and then also whatever other color you have. They provide a shuffle effect for Jace the Mind Sculptor or Brainstorm. Sylvan Library, Courser, lots of things make you want to have a shuffle effect. They fuel the graveyard for Delve. Just great cards, and you can never really go wrong with a blue fetch land. Next up is another card that is a little bit maybe unhealthy for the format. I know in particular LSV thinks it should not exist, and that's Bribery. It's high variance, and there's sometimes where it's bad. In fact, one time I played a Bribery against a Storm deck, and their only creature was one Goblin Electromancer, which was in play, so it just completely whiffed. But in general, it'll be quite good. I do side it out sometimes against like mono red or mono white, but sometimes it can just get an Emrakul or a Blightsteel or something like that and just instantly end the game. Just their whole deck is around assembling some tricky combination of cards to make something happen, and instead you can just pay 5 mana for a card that does that whole thing for you. So pretty unfair, pretty busted. Again, I think it's at its best against decks that are good, which is something to keep in mind. And then, even worst case scenario, you can usually snag a Titan or a Consecrated Sphinx, unless it's a very unusual circumstance. So, great card, really high ceiling, very easy to play, so love that card a lot. Next up, we have a cheap interactive spell, and that's Remand. It's not as busted as some of these other cards that I've been talking about, but it's good because it's good against those busted cards. There's lots of expensive things, and it can even be a source of card advantage where you can see an opponent go turn 2, like Black Lotus, play a 5-drop, think that they just win, and you remand, and it's card advantage because it's trading with the Black Lotus and drawing you a card. You can also remand your own spell in a pinch against counter magic, so it can be a form of card advantage that way. And just in general, I love counter magic because it's often trading with cards that the opponent has invested a lot of resources into. So on the surface, it looks like a cheap 1-for-1 trade, but it's actually often even better than that. Next up is Mana Leak. I could understand wanting to take Remand over Mana Leak, and I do think Remand is better in some decks, like Storm, where you can remand your own Storm card, and also really proactive tempo-y decks, or just combo decks in general. But I like Mana Leak a little bit better because often you want to save your counter magic for cards that are very important for your opponent's deck. So, say, like, they're playing Reanimator, and, like, they're really banking on this Recurring Nightmare. And Remand is good. You can buy some time and sort of stall them, but Mana Leak is better there, because you can sort of put a final answer to a card that's really important for them. So even though it's not better in every single deck, in any deck that's trying to interact, I do think dealing with a threat permanently is good. And sure, Mana Leak does get dead at some point in the game, but it's pretty late when that happens, because a lot of decks do have expensive cards, and I mean, if you have any mana denial plan at all, like Wasteland or Strip Mine, then it has a longer shelf life, and the most important thing is interacting early. So, sure, it's worse on turn 30, but you don't normally go that far in Vintage Cube. Next up, we have Grizzle Brand. I think this is a really sweet card, super good in combo decks. Most notably, Grizzle Reanimator, where it's just the best card. Like, I think it's the most important card in any Reanimator deck for the most part. I mean, I actually don't. There's one card that is above it on this list, but in general, I do think Grizzle Brand is amazing. In Reanimator, it's always the thing you want to get first, and it'll find you more things to reanimate other threats. Secondly, it's also great in sneak attack decks. You can put it into play and, again, draw a million cards, sneak attack something else, and it sort of keeps the cards flowing. There's the two main uses for it, but it can have some value in other decks, but I think that's enough. Like, it is just the best thing you can do. It's the best creature to just have in play for an instant and just draw 7 cards. That's just so busted. It also is a good clock on its own, and it pairs very well with Lightning Reeves if you can get an instant hit and regain 7 life immediately. So love Grizzle Brand, and I'm always happy to start a draft with Grizzle Brand. It's also a fun balance of good and exciting. Like Mana Leak, you know what a Mana Leak is going to do, but Grizzle Brand is sort of, it leads to some pretty sweet, fun things, and a criticism some have leveraged at me is that I sort of just draft good stuff mid-range decks too much, and That's because I go for trophies, but this is one card that is good, and I will draft highly, but is also really fun. Next up, a card that's near and dear to my heart, and one that I've had a lot of success with in Constructed. I might be overrating this a little bit just because of how much success I've had with it, but it's also possible I'm good at playing with this sort of deck, or maybe it's just that good. Teferi, Time Raveler, super, super busted card. I just love this Planeswalker so much. It can come down for cheap, immediately draw a card, and make them have to deal with it, and then sometimes it's just amazing. It's just on suspend cards. Like, there's no better feeling than your opponent suspending Ancestral Vision, and you worry that they're going to outcard you, and then the turn before it comes off, you just slam your Teferi, and they can't cast it, and that's just so good. Turns off all counter magic. I also think the +1, a lot of people think it's basically just filler, but I actually think you can use it to great effect. Great with board sweepers, great with certain sorcery speed removal spells. It's amazing with Fractured Identity. End of turn Fractured Identity, their thing, untap, you can attack immediately if it's a creature, or like you untap with a Planeswalker if that's what you hit. So I do think the plus is quite good and in the right deck. So just a sweet, sweet card. Lets you really craft your game plan very well, and it makes it hard for your opponent to interact. Again, it's also another card that's at its best against blue decks, and I do think I like cards that are good in that circumstance because you play against a lot of blue decks, and they are often pretty good. Next up, Teferi's big brother, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. I do like this card slightly more. I could see an argument either way, but the -3 is very powerful. Again, like, this is a powerful format. There's really powerful permanents. Some of them are hard to deal with. And the fact that you can just tuck Blightsteel or Ulamog or a Planeswalker that's about to ultimate makes it very great interaction. And then the +1 is amazing. There's lots of great 2-mana counterspells, 2 of which I've already talked about. There may be more on the way. And just consistent card draw is great. It just does everything you want it to do. So I love both Teferis, and if I ever get both in the same pack, I mean, I probably wouldn't take one because I know someone's going to slam the other and move into blue-white, but I'm always happy to lead a draft on Teferi and really force blue-white after that point. Next up, Strip Mine. This card is one that I haven't really prioritized highly enough, I think, in the past. It is just busted. If you have horrible fixing, it's not as good, but I would honestly still play it in literally any deck, just as a 18th land or however many lands you're going to play +1, because it's just a 1-mana, it's a 0-mana land destruction spell. That's so good. And that's not even counting synergies you can have with it. Like, if you pair with Crucible of Worlds, Renin 6, or Remnant Excavator, that's a whole game plan in and of itself, and don't even get me started if you also have a fast bond. But it's just super good. It's at its best in aggressive decks that have low curves, especially if you have Moxen, and you can sort of be developing your game plan while setting them back. But it's good in any deck, and even just strip mining a basic is fine. But you can also hit Manlands, or Shellback Isle, or Library of Alexandria, or Bazaar of Baghdad. There's lots of very good lands. Gaia's Cradle. There's lots of stuff that you want to be strip mining, and so great card. And also, in general, if you can upgrade your deck in the mana base, that's a great way to do it, because you'll often have tons of great spells, and the upgrade from a basic land to a strip mine is much bigger than the upgrade from Teferi to Teferi, or whatever your card you're cutting to, you know. It's just a good way to level up your deck. I think in general, people like non-basic lands that have an effect beyond fixing are very powerful in the right deck. Next up, a combo piece, Sneak Attack. Quite a bit better than Through the Breach. Through the Breach is not on this list, although it's still a good card, but Sneak Attack is just very, very powerful. It's at its best if you have Eldrazi, certainly, and Emrakul the Eon's Torn, but it's also amazing with Grizzle Brand. You can do some shenanigans with Kiki Jiki, great with Woodfall Primus because you sack it and you get your thing back. Very splashable. I think the best Sneak Attack decks are basically mono blue, splashing red for like Sneak Attack and maybe a couple burn spells or like a Braid. But I just think that Sneak Attack is so good with card draw, very fast, and you can really abuse it quite well. So, and it also lends itself to the best color combination, blue-red. So lots of points for that. Next up is a card that's surprisingly fair for its high position on in this list, but it's just a testament to how strong this card is. Glen Alondra Archmage. It's so good in a lot of matchups just because of what I've been saying before. Like, a lot of decks are really in on doing some setup and building up to one huge non-creature spell. And so Glen Alondra, to just, in a way that's very hard to interact with, stop 2 spells is super powerful. It just, yeah, I mean, you can't really say enough good things about this card. If you can combo with stuff like Restoration Angel or bouncing it, A combo I really like is to use Glen Alondra counter spell and then use Fallen Shinobi to, it's a flyer, so it can get in there, return Glen to your hand, get in your hit, and the next turn you can replay Glen and counter 2 more spells. It's also just absolutely backbreaking at Storm. Not that I think Storm is a particularly common or good deck, but it's just really unfair. Like, they really, really need that Yogg-Well to resolve or whatever, and just Glen is amazing. And it's so hard to interact with. In general, you want to not tap out for it because then they can Swords of Plowshares it or whatever, or worst case scenario, like mind control it. Although I guess if they do mind control it, you do get it back when it dies. But it's hard to balance. Like, if you play it with a mana up, you just can't really get punished for that. And even in a pinch, it's not bad as just a blocker. I've traded Glen Alondra Archmage with Goblin Guide before and been fine with that exchange, and then it comes back and you can counter their Planeswalker or Burn Spell later. So, sweet card. Next up, another blue-red combo piece, and a combo that I think is slightly stronger. Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker. It's quite a bit better than Splinter Twin because you don't get 2 for 1 if they kill the thing you target. It's harder to cast because it's more expensive, and triple red is tough, especially because usually you want to be fairly heavy blue in Kiki-Jiki decks, but I just think it's great. But yeah, I love Kiki-Jiki a lot, and it's also another reason why I like it better than the Sneak Attack combo is because Kiki-Jiki just wins the game immediately. Like, you don't have to worry about finding your other thing with Grizzle Brand or like them making a comeback after Emrakul. Like, you just win the game. Doesn't matter what life total they're at. Doesn't matter what they have. I mean, I guess if they have Gideon, Jura, and they plus, then you kill their Planeswalker and they have 1 turn to respond. But it's just awesome. And it has a lot of sort of random value, just copying Moldrifter or stuff like that. And a combo that's particularly good is Imperial Recruiter, because you can Recruiter for your Kiki-Jiki, play Kiki-Jiki, copy Imperial Recruiter, fetch Pestermite, and then play Pestermite. So it turns Imperial Recruiter into a 1-card combo if you have everything else in your deck. Just a great place to start. Next up, another red card, which people may be surprised to see 2 red cards this high on the list. It's definitely not the best color in general, but Fiery Confluence. One of the most underrated cards in the cube for sure. If I made a top 5 underrated cards list, this would be on it, no doubt. In fact, it might even be number 1. I've seen this go like 2nd or 3rd to last, which is just absolutely ridiculous. That's like more ridiculous than seeing a Soul Ring 3rd pick. Like, that's a hot take, and I might get some flack for that in the comments, but I truly believe that. It's just so, so good. The best mode is just blowing up 3 artifacts. There's so many artifacts in this format. So many of them are so powerful. I mean, just blowing up like a Mox, a Signet, and hitting them for 2 is like sort of the worst case scenario, and that's an amazing 2 for 1. And sometimes it's just so much better. You can blow up Mindslaver, you can blow up Threaten Dynamo, you can sweep the board. In general, I don't think sweepers, like creature board sweepers, are amazing because this isn't a particularly creature-heavy format, but this is an absolutely main-deckable board sweeper. 3 damage to everything, can win a lot of games. And then 6 damage to the face is so much. That's more than any other spell that you can cast other than an X spell like a Bonfire or Banefire. But it's just so good. I mean, the 6 damage is most relevant in mono red, obviously. And I do think it's going to be the best card in most mono red decks. But it just is also playable in other decks. This is another card where I'm super happy to slam this first pick because it's the best card in your mono red deck and also the best card in your blue red control deck often. So please, please, please stop passing this card. There's no other red card you should ever take over this. That's a spoiler that this is the top red card, but it is. I mean, you could maybe take Kiki-Jiki or Sneak Attack over it, but never, ever, ever take like a Goblin Guide or a Lightning Bolt over a Fiery Confluence. It is that good. It will win games. You'll never be sad you cast it. Take Fiery Confluence. Or don't, and let me keep taking it, but if you want to win, take Fiery Confluence. Next up, another land, and one that's very versatile, Ancient Tomb. Some people might not like me putting this over Strip Mine, but Ancient Tomb is just super good. It lets you play turn 1 Signet a lot of times, and it's sort of just a free ramp spell. Like, in a mono green deck, you invest a card and some mana to play your Llanowar Elves, but you could also just play play Ancient Tomb, and it's just so good. It fits in like any deck. It's at its best in artifact decks or mono white, also quite good mono red and mono green. But I'll play it in pretty much any deck. It's not at its best if you're playing a really slow deck where you're trying to tap every single land many times because the 2 damage can add up. And there's even some matchups where I'll side it out if I'm playing against a really fast red deck. But just a super good card. Again, if you can upgrade your mana base, that's a good thing to do. And I'm always very, very happy to take Ancient Tomb. Opens up a lot of good things. Next up, another land, and I might have spoiled it a little bit when I misspoke. Gaia's Cradle. I do think it's a little bit more niche. It doesn't go in every single deck, but man, when it's good, is it good? Like, you can just play this card, and it will just tap for 8 mana sometimes. And it means that you can play big token makers like Deranged Hermit or Avenger of Zendikar, and they don't even cost mana at all. They're free. It's just so good. It's not hard for it to break even and just make 1 mana in the right deck, and usually it'll be far better. I also think in general people have this image of this card as just being a mono green card, but it's totally not. I will always play this in mono white decks. I'll play this in most mono red decks. Like, it's not good if it's your only land, sure, but as long as you have one other land and any cheap creatures, Gaia's Cradle is just super busted, and it becomes even better if you have anything like Garruk Wildspeaker to untap it. So really sweet card. It can take a green deck from a 6 to an 8 very quickly. Yeah, just awesome. And also you can have a lot of things to tutor for it with like Golos or Primeval Titan. So lots of good things with Gaia's Cradle, and that's a card I'm very happy to first pick for sure. Next up, Upheaval. This is a card that's not as versatile. All the other cards I've named, or not all, but a lot of the other cards I've named are good in many different decks, and this is one that's not really great in many decks, but it can get you out of situations that literally no other card in Magic history can get you out of. Like, it doesn't matter if they have 7 cards in hand and 1 million lands and 5 planeswalkers that are all about to ult them in and 15 creatures that are each lethal. Upheaval can get you out of that. It's at its best in the mono blue artifacts deck, where you can just have a bunch of signets and you have 10 mana, tap 10, Upheaval, then you return everything, you have 4 mana. You can play a land and really develop your board. Then you pass it back and they have 15 cards in hand and play their tap land and go to discard and pitch everything. It's just super backbreaking. Great when you're behind, great when you're ahead, like a great card. It's also the second best deck for it is blue-green. If you just have a bunch of mana dorks, same thing. You can just play it and it'll just dig you out of any hole, and it's just awesome. You can Mystic Tudor, you can really build around it and sort of bank on having consistent access. So yeah, I just love Upheaval. And it's also a great combo with the next card on the list. Another land, Shellback Isle. Shellback Isle is a bit unassuming, and it's not particularly strong in constructed formats, but when you only have 40 cards in your deck, it's very easy to get to the condition and have 20 cards or fewer, especially in blue decks where you have a lot of card draw. And Shellback Isle, not only is it a 2-for-1 out of nowhere that upgrades your mana base and doesn't even take up a spell slot, but it's also card selection, mana ramp, and it gives you an instant speed play. Those are all things that I think are slightly underrated by some people, and definitely things that you don't appreciate the full value of when you first look at this card. But it's just amazing. You can put an Emrakul under it, and then just play instant speed Emrakul, and it costs 2 mana. It just cheats on mana. It's so good. I'll splash Shellback Isle, just not even have any blue spells sometimes, because it's that good. It has a slight downside of entering tapped, but that's usually fine, and you can also make it even better if you have something like Brainstorm or Jace the Mind Sculptor to fix the top of your library. Yeah, Shellback Isle is just amazing, and it really upgrades any deck that can support it by a massive margin. And then if you get early and you can build around it, even more so. So I feel like you could win a game without even really casting any spells by just putting a big Eldrazi under Shellback Isle and just not dying for a while, and then end a turn throwing it out there, hitting them, annihilating all their permanents, and just winning the game. So next up is a great black card, one that's even higher than Grizzle Brand and Thoughtseize, and that is Demonic Tutor. Vampiric Tutor is also good, and it is on this list in the bottom 50, but Demonic Tutor is quite a bit better because it's not card disadvantage, even though it is more expensive. It's just so versatile. Another card that becomes better the better your deck is. It's at its best in combo, like Reanimator or Storm, where you have a massive difference between your best cards and your worst cards, and getting the right combination of cards is super broken. But it's great in just a normal deck, too. A blue-black control deck can just go turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Demonic Tutor for your Ashiok, turn 3 Ashiok, and that's really hard for a lot of decks to beat. It's never bad, it's cheap, it's splashable. Demonic Tutor is just an amazing card. Next up, Mystic Confluence. This is a super busted spell. I was about to say counterspell, but that does not do it justice because it just does everything. This is a counterspell that never really goes dead. Like, you can pretty much always counterspell unless they pay 9. So they can handle any spell, and then if you can just counter a big spell, like if they just tap out for some big threat and you go Mystic Confluence, counter, draw 2, that's just backbreaking. And honestly, your opponent should probably concede on the spot. It's just so good when you're at parity. And what makes this really over the top is that it's great when you're behind too. You don't even need to draw cards. You can just use it to bounce 3 creatures, and that will get you out of a lot of situations that no other blue card can. Just the fact that it's instant speed interaction that plays almost like a board sweeper at sometimes, in some circumstances, is just like ridiculous. And the worst case scenario is it's just 5 mana instant speed draw 3, which is honestly playable. Like, if there was a card that just did that, it would be playable in some Vintage Cube decks. And the fact that it's that with so much upside is amazing. They're so versatile. You can always use it for whatever you want. It's also a very skill testing card. In general, cards that have a lot of options really give you an advantage to, or an opportunity to take advantage of your skills. And so if you think you're an above average player, Mystic Confluence becomes even better. Frankly, if you're pretty new to the format, Mystic Confluence might want to be a bit lower on this list. Maybe something like Guy's Cradle becomes a bit better. But even if you aren't the most skilled player, there's no bad way you can miss the Confluence. It's always good. Next up is a card that is super underrated in my opinion. It gets a lot of hate. A lot of people don't even think it should be in the queue, but I do think it definitely deserves a slot, and I think it's quite strong. The top black card on my list, Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni. People think that this is bad, but you need to keep in mind, again, this is a format where creatures are very strong. And so you're not just getting back a 3/3 with Ink Eyes. You're getting back something huge, and it's great against board sweepers. It deals a lot of damage. It's just a really underrated card, and if you can't tell that I'm joking by now, I am. It should not be in the cube. Just had to throw that one in there, though. Ink Eyes, such a meme. Next up, Tellurian Academy. This card does deserve to be on this list because it is just one of the best lands ever printed. It isn't good in every deck for sure. It's probably one of the... It's actually, I think, one of the only cards that's this high on this list that is very niche. But it is just so good when it's good. In the mono blue artifact deck, this card is unbelievable. It can ramp you so much. Again, I mean, it's similar to Urza. The only reason it's so much higher is just because it is a land, and I think that makes it better. But it just can turn artifacts into mana so easily, and blue has so many ways to use the mana. The fact that it makes blue mana is huge because it fuels big card draw spells. It's really just an incredible card. So, Tellurian Academy, people might think it's a bit dicey to have this so high on the list because it is a card that is only good in certain decks. And so it's a card that's much better if you get it like 4th pick and you sort of know that sort of deck is open. But the ceiling is just so high that I'm always happy to take an early Tellurian Academy and try and make it work if I can. And if you can't, I don't think first picks are super essential for a lot of the other decks. Like, it's the classic, like, first pick Tellurian Academy, take 2 artifacts, realize it's dried up, and go into white is the worst case scenario. And so you're not wed to it if you take it first, but if you can play it, it's incredible. And it also is good in some other decks too. Like, if you have just a decent number of signets or Mox in, like, it can be just a solid value land in other, like, blue-eye control with a lot of cheap mana or stuff like that too. So, awesome card. Next up, another artifact, Grim Monolith. Not nearly as high of a ceiling as Tellurian Academy, but still a very high ceiling and very flexible. Just the fact that you can just play this on turn 2 and then with no other acceleration play a 6-drop on turn 3 is busted. It had its best in mono blue artifacts again, but it's good in other stuff too. I've had my fair share of blue-white control deck where you just go turn 1 Colonnade, turn 2 Island Grim Monolith, turn 3 Plains Elspeth Sun's Champion, and that's just really hard for a lot of decks to beat. Not untapping is not that big of an issue because it's just like once you have a 3 mana boost in 1 turn, you're so far ahead, and the fact that it can be used to untap to instant speed is really nice. And it generates net mana the turn you play it. So some situations you just want to play turn 2 Grim Monolith into 3-drop. I don't think that's usually a good line, and I actually think I see people do that more often than they should probably. But the fact that you can do that, just the fact that there's an artifact that makes mana the turn you play it is just ridiculous. Why would there ever be cards that do that, right? There can't be more on this list. Next up, Tinker. Again, this is sort of a swath of mono blue artifacts cards, but I think they are just also good, and this is the best of the bunch. Like, Tinker is so broken. You can consistently play this on turn 1 or 2 in the right deck and just sack your Mox or whatever and go find a Blightsteel Colossus. Just have a 1-turn clock. Or Inkwell Leviathan, a thing that's impossible to interact with. Or Sundering Titan and just blow up all of their lands. Particularly in mono blue, Sundering Titan is good because you don't have to blow up a lot of your own lands. So I just think Tinker is a messed up card. The fact that it's a Tudor and cheats on mana by so much is just unreal. Again, does not go in every deck. You need to have enough cheap artifacts to support it. Really, I think you need 5. Ideally, you could play it with 4. So I do think some decks just play Tinker when they probably shouldn't. But if you have the right deck where you have 10 cheap artifacts, then Tinker is just the best card in your deck by so much, and you can just win games without casting a single other spell so easily. Well, I guess you play your one other artifact to sacrifice, but beyond that, you don't need to do anything else because Tinker is that good. Ideally, you have 2 targets because it does suck if you only have 1 and you draw it or something happens to it. And also, ideally, you have 2 different threats. So, for example, like if your only threats are Wormcoil and Mirror Battlesphere, that's not ideal because they're both things that just like attack. I like to have multiple different effects so you have a choice for what you tinker for, but even if you don't have that, it's just good enough that it's worth playing. Also in blue, you're more likely to be able to have spells that allow you to find it, whether it's Mystical Tutor or just cantrips. So sweet card. Next up is the last card that I would say is fair, although some people might not think it's fair. Counterspell. And I put this super high, I know, like there's some truly broken cards that this is over, and maybe the fact that I value this card so highly is why some people think that my decks aren't fun enough, but Counterspell is just so good. I mean, Remand and Mana Leak are also so good, and Counterspell is just way better than both. It's a little bit harder to cast because it does require double blue, but it's worth putting in that effort because it's just always going to be good, always going to be at least a 1-for-1 normal card advantage, almost always trade with a more expensive spell. It really is just the glue that holds together a lot of great decks. And so you might have seen, I've had some like blue control decks that look great on paper, like good mana, tons of planeswalkers, great proactive plan, but I'll still give them a 7 out of 10 if they don't have counter spells because it's just so important to have that form of interaction. And counterspell is just an amazing counterspell. I mean, there's a reason that it's named after this spell. So I will rarely pass a counterspell if I can take it, and it's early enough that I can move into blue, and I'll always be happy about it. It's also amazing with Snapcaster Mage, which is a card that didn't quite make this list, but was just below the bottom, and I do think it's quite powerful. The only reason it's not higher, it is very flexible and good, and I think it was like 53 or something. It's very close to making this list, but I just didn't take it because it's only good if you already have other good cards, like cheap interaction. So, yeah, it's just, Counterspell is amazing. Next up, Channel. This is the last card I think on the list. The last card on this list that's only good in like a very specific deck, and you have to have the right support for it. But it's so good in that deck that it's worth it. Like, whenever I'm talking about the broken things you do in Vintage Cube and how it's hard to interact with sometimes, Channel Emrakul is always the one I go to. And Channel Fireball is a great website that, I mean, clearly, like, Channel just is an amazing card that has a long history of winning games, and it will continue to do so as long as it's legal in this format. You need to have the right deck for it, so you can't just jam in any green deck because, like, Channel, Craterhoof, Behemoth is pretty awkward, but if you have big colorless threats like Karn, Ugin, and the Eldrazi, Sundering Titan, Mirror Battlesphere, all those big artifacts that I've just been talking about with Tinker and Tellurian Academy, it's just so good. Ends the game on the spot. You get the cast trigger. If you draw it later in the game, sometimes paying life can be bad, but it's pretty rare, and like if you play this on turn 2 or turn 1 with the help of a Mox, that's just truly unbelievable. So great card. Great card to build around. It's worth it because the upside is so high, and just an amazing card. Next up, Library of Alexandria. This is a bit of a polarizing card. LSV made one ranking where I think this was like the 5th best card in the cube or something, like really up there, and he's a lot less high on it now, and I do think it's not a card you play in, well, it is a card you play in every deck. There's no deck where I would not play this card, but it's not a card that's amazing in every deck. If you're a slow blue deck that already has a lot of card draw, Library of Alexandria is a bit awkward because you can just sit around there durdling and drawing cards, and meanwhile they're like ramping or doing broken things, and you can just lose to that. But in any deck that's even slightly proactive, it's just so good. It's at its best in, I would say, well, hard to say. Mono white, mono green, and mono red all use Library exceptionally well. So does mono blue artifacts, but again, any deck will play this card. The downside is so low, it's colorless, so I guess it makes your mana slightly worse, but it comes in untapped, and you can just play it later in the game, and it's not bad. If you do have it in the opening, like, there's nothing that will strike fear into the hearts of many decks like a turn 1 Library of Alexandria. Just drawing 2 cards every turn for such low cost is truly, truly amazing. And again, it's a place where you can upgrade your deck in the lands, which is really nice. It also just can supply card draw to decks and colors that don't really have good access to it normally. So, love Library. It's also really fun. I love having a full hand, and it presents a lot of interesting decisions too. Deciding when to go off of the library plan is a very, very tricky decision that a lot of things go into. So, yeah, one of the hardest times is, say you mulligan. You skip a land drop to get on the library plan. That's putting yourself back a lot. And so if you're playing against a fast deck and you're slow, probably not. But there are circumstances where it's right to do that. And so it's a very skill testing card, very fun card, and very powerful card. So it's always nice to have cards like that in the Vintage Cube. Next up, Manavolt. This is sort of like a Grim Monolith. In some ways it's worse because it hurts you when it's tapped and it's harder to untap. But costing 1 versus 2 is a big difference. And just generating 2 mana the turn you played is pretty busted. And then there's also just plenty of games where I've gone turn 1, Island, Manavolt, turn 2, Plains, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. And just that level of mana acceleration in a colorless card that any deck can play is just really bonkers. There are some decks where I wouldn't play Manavolt, but it's very, very rare. And there's a lot of decks where it's just the best card in your deck. So, super, super sweet card. Usually take it if you can. But one of the few cards I would take over it is Jace the Mind Sculptor. Just a truly iconic card. Long considered the best Planeswalker ever printed. It just, in this format, it's especially good because it's a slightly less creature-driven format, so Jace can stick around. He's not as good at protecting himself as some Planeswalkers because the only way he can interact with the board is by minusing, and then he's down to 2 loyalty, which is a little bit light. But I mean, bouncing a creature can be really good. Sometimes, like against a Blightsteel Colossus, it's just a game-winning effect. And even when it's just a tempo play and they can replay it, you bounce their thing, they replay it, and then you untap, draw 3 cards, and you have so many options. Another skill-testing card, which is always fun. Brainstorm is a very skill-testing card in general, and the fact that Brainstorm is just one of your many options with Jace is pretty sweet. And the fact that it's also a win condition, it's not like... Usually you do want to brainstorm, but there are some situations where your hand is already good or you're low on cards in library and you just want to start plussing and knock out their library, and that's a totally valid way to win the game. Fate Seal is actually a very powerful effect when against a lot of decks that are really relying on a certain few cards. Like, you can just really make sure that a combo deck never hits their combo piece if you just keep on plussing. So, sweet, sweet card. Doesn't commit you to too many colors. Only commits you to the best color. And some splash benefit if you have, like, Shellback Isle or Terminus, which is sort of unplayable otherwise, but good with Jace. So, sweet card and fun card, and one I'm always happy to pick early. Next up, Dak Faden. So, some might disagree with this pick, and I do agree that Jace is the more powerful card in the abstract, certainly more powerful in constructed, usually. But, specifically in this format, I love Dak Faden. And that's for the -2. Just coming in and stealing an artifact can be backbreaking. It's very, very common for an opponent to just go turn 2 Signet, and like that's a big part of their game plan. And then you just go, boom, Dak, steal your Signet, you're set back. Maybe you can't even play something on turn 3, and then you untap and you have 5 mana now, and that's really that can just end the game right there. And the fact that good of an effect, like it's an instant 2-for-1. That's even potentially better because stealing a Signet is like so important. So many decks really rely on their mana, and then you also have a Planeswalker in play afterward is ridiculous. And if you just steal something next turn plus and then steal another thing, that's just brutal. So, Dak Faden, anything that interacts with artifacts is great in this cube. Like, Ancient Grudge is a great card, and obviously, everyone knows now how high I am on Fiery Confluence. But Dak Faden is just a sweet, sweet piece of interaction. Also, the +1 is just good. Like, it can dig... This is a format where you'll have some cards that are really powerful, and so digging you towards your mana acceleration, or digging you towards your combo piece, or digging you towards that one piece of interaction that you really need against their whatever is just super, super good. And it even has some splash benefit where, like, you can +1 on them and mill them out if they're low on cards, or if you have Narset, you can +1 on them, and because of Narset's static ability, they can only draw 1 card, so they draw 1 and discard 2. So again, I think Jace the Mind Sculptor is the more powerful card, but specifically in this format, I like Dak even more. But, crazily enough, Dak is still not my top-ranked Planeswalker. Oko is next. Oko, Thief of Crowns, aka the biggest mistake in history of Magic, maybe. Probably not, but it's a huge mistake. Like, everyone knows this card's good, so I'm not going to belabor it too much, but, like, it just comes in, you plus to 6 loyalty. It's a 3-mana Planeswalker, and it's in green, so it's more than any other Planeswalker, easy to cast on turn 2. Just turn 1 Noble Hierarch, turn 2 Oko, you're on the play. How can you ever lose? It comes down, goes to 6 loyalty, very, very difficult to kill in combat. The fact that it has 2+1s, like, is just ridiculous. Sometimes stealing something is very good, but also just making an endless stream of 3/3s is amazing. And then the +1 is at its best in a format like this that has so many broken things. Like, you can mess up their mana development with a Signet. You can turn their Reanimator target into an Elk. It gives green decks a way to deal with any creature very effectively. It's just so stupid how hard to kill it is and how great at interacting it is. Definitely shouldn't be a card, but I'll still almost always take it if I can. This was my number 1 card out of every single card in Legacy Cube. I just think it's that powerful. So, Oko, great card. Always take it if you can. Always splash it if you can. Pretty much, even if I'm playing a deck that has no green cards and no intention of splashing green, I'll really prioritize green lands in like a blue-white or blue-whatever deck because Oko is just always worth it, and it's just that powerful. So cheap, so good. Yeah, stupid card. Very frustrating to play against sometimes. And it really makes you want to have ways to just deal with Planeswalkers on their face in your deck, like Council Judgment. Dealing with it with damage is a tricky and long road. Next up, Mana Drain. I ranked Counterspell 19th, so clearly Mana Drain's got to be pretty high because it's literally just a strictly better Counterspell. Back when it was printed, there was Mana Burn, there was some downside, but now it's just an unbelievable card. Like, yeah, Counterspell on its own is so good, and then just the fact that it's like it can just have massive upside is ridiculous. The most fair use is still Broken, which is just turn 2, Mana Drain your 3-drop, turn 3, like play a 6-drop, Elspeth Sun Champion, Consecrated Sphinx, like something like that. And the fact that you just negated their entire turn and then played something way ahead of schedule is unreal. And then sometimes you can counter like a 6-drop and just slam an Eldrazi or something off of it. I really love blue-green channel Mana Drain decks because they both enable you to just play huge colorless things way ahead of schedule. And the fact that Mana Drain is not only an enabler but also an amazing piece of interaction that's cheap and can deal with pretty much anything other than like Emrakul Aeon Thorn is ridiculous. So really, really amazing card for sure. Next up is Mox Emerald. It may be a little bit sacrilegious to have a Mox outside of the top 10, but this is the worst Mox by quite a bit in my opinion. Green already has access to great mana acceleration, and there's a lot of times where this is basically Llanowar Elves. And in fact, I actually have cut Mox Emerald from the green deck before. That might sound crazy, but your green decks do want to have creatures. And so if you have Natural Order or Craterhoof Behemoth or Fauna Shaman, or Skull Clan, there's tons of reasons why creatures are better than artifacts in green decks. And the reason it is this high is that you don't have to play it in a green deck. Like, a Mox Emerald in a mono white deck is still great. Like, a Mox Emerald in a base blue deck is great, especially if you have Oko. So it is a great card. Like, it's better than Mana Drain according to this list. So I clearly like it a lot. But it is the worst Mox by quite a bit. And so I would absolutely take any other Mox over this. But I'm still not going to be sad if I open its power. Next up, Fractured Identity. People might have been wondering when that was going to come, and it did manage to crack the top 10, which is crazy for a 5-mana card. By far, like, where's the last 5-mana card? Mystic Confluence at number 24. Actually, Inca is at 23. But that's just a testament to how good this card is. It looks good already. Like, it looks like a better mind control, but in practice, it's just so much better than that. You get an end of the battlefield effect. They cannot get their thing back no matter what. You can hit any permanent, including planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments, obviously creatures. I guess you can't hit lands, but it's just so good. And that's not even taking into account any combos you might have with it. A video that I actually am literally going to upload right after I finish this video. So by the time this video is coming out, then you'll see my Fractured Identity.deck. But the fact that you can flash it back with Snapcaster, you can play instant speed with Teferi, you can reduce its cost with Baral, a truly, truly broken card that maybe shouldn't be in the set or in the cube, but I will almost never pass Fractured Identity. And just in terms of the impact it has on the game, it would probably be even higher. The only thing that's putting it at 10 instead of higher is that it does sort of commit you to 2 colors, but I will almost always splash one of these colors if I'm playing the other. And I've been playing mono green and just taken Fractured Identity and splash blue and white just for this card, which sort of shows you how powerful it is. Do not pass this card. Next up is Mox Jet. It's a Mox. It's amazing, and it's a lot better than Mox Emerald. I do think Mono Black Reanimator is a deck that uses Moxen very, very well because so many of your key cards cost 1 mana. Like if you can just go turn 1, land, Thoughtseize, Mox, Entomb, turn 2, Animate Dead or whatever your reanimation spell of choice is. That's so much better than doing that all 1 turn slowed down because so much of that deck's game plan is to be fast, and it's just an awesome card. Also good in blue-black control. So, I mean, it's good in any deck. There's pretty much no deck that would not play Mox Jet except for maybe some builds of mono green. But adding black is nice because there's a lot of impactful 1 or 2 mana black spells. But there's also a lot of impactful red spells, which is why Mox Ruby comes in just ahead. I like Mox Ruby slightly more because I do think first of all, red is a slightly stronger color, I would say, like with blue-red being so good. Being able to do your combo, be it Sneak Attack or Kiki Jiki, 1 turn ahead of schedule with Mox Ruby is amazing. And perhaps more importantly, mono red just becomes unbelievable if you have a Mox Ruby. It really just levels up the deck so much. The difference between turn 1 Mountain Goblin Guide Attack and Mountain Monastery Swift Spear, Mox Ruby, Goblin Guide Attack for 4 is huge. It just puts on so much pressure. And then sometimes you can even get value out of it later with like sacking it to P and Kieran Nalar or something. You can play a Planeswalker turn early, and it's in a color that really does not have mana acceleration. Like, at least black has Dark Ritual, but there's really no ways to make mana in red. So Mox Ruby is just awesome. I do like it a bit better than Mox Jet. Next up is Mana Crypt. I wouldn't fault someone for, like, the order of the Mox and Mana Crypt is a little bit nebulous and depends partially on personal preference and play style. But Mana Crypt is so good. Just making 2 mana for 0 mana is ridiculous. Like, it's good in any deck. It's not as good in slower decks that want to sort of win over the course of a long time. The downside can be pretty important if you have them play for like 6 or 7 turns. But just making 2 mana versus 1 mana is a big difference. And like it is colorless, but in something like mono white or mono blue artifacts, just making 2 mana out of nowhere is truly broken. And then there's other ways to sort of mitigate the downside, like you can repeal it or sack it to Duretti or something like that. So Mana Crypt is just broken. I wouldn't fault someone for taking a Mox Ruby or a Mox Jet over it, although you should definitely take Mana Crypt over Mox Emerald. But I think Mana Crypt deserves to be here just because it is that good. It just makes so much mana so quickly. And the downside is bad, but if you're just making 2 extra mana every turn, you can usually win through that. I did still put Mox Pearl above it, though. And I would not have done this even a week or 2 ago, but I've just had so much success with mono white lately. Pretty much every single time I draft it, I get a trophy. I mean, I never force it, but I go into it when it's just clearly very open, and it's just so powerful. And it uses Mox Pearl exceptionally well. Turn 1 Thalia is absolutely backbreaking against a bunch of decks. Turn 1 Stoneforge Mystic, similarly extremely powerful. Mono white can use extra mana better than other like aggressive decks, specifically mono red, because you have swords, and so you have like decent mana sinks with that. And I just think Mox Pearl is amazing. And the fact that I've had so much success with both mono white aggro and blue white control, and Mox Pearl is amazing in both, is just awesome. So sweet card. Also, I just think blue white is such a good combination. So you can accelerate into your Teferis or Fractured Identity. That's pretty awesome. Blue white is the only color combination that has 3 cards on this list, which says something about how strong I think it is. So, great pick. Totally deserves to slot at number 6 in my opinion. I saw one list that said it was the worst Mox, or maybe, oh yeah, according to that Reddit post, it was the worst Mox other than Mox Emerald, and I just totally disagree. I think it's awesome. Next up, Time Walk. Iconic card, so powerful. There's another card that does the exact same thing in the cube for 5 mana instead of 2, and it's still good. that's sort of just a testament to how powerful Time Walk is. It's at its best when you have a lot of planeswalkers or when you have a lot of creatures. Like, sometimes it is just turn 2 Time Walk, draw your card, play another land, basically explore. And the fact that that's the floor is pretty ridiculous, but then sometimes it is just truly unbelievable. My personal favorite use is to have both Teferis in play at the same time. You go, I mean, maybe off of Mox, but even assuming no acceleration, you got your Teferi down on turn 3, big Teferi on turn 5, plus both Teferis. You can play it at instant speed now. You untap 2 lands, and then in your own end step, you can play Time Walk, then untap, and you have 2 Teferis in play, and really the world's your oyster at that point. If you lose, like, you are the worst player in history, no offense. Like, that's just such a broken line, and it's also amazing in blue-green, where you can, like, play your big fatties, and then play Time Walk to essentially give them haste, or get another activation out of your planeswalkers, but there's no deck that Time Walk is not good in. Blue-white, like, I'm not just going to get through every single deck where it's good. Sorry, when I said blue-white there, I meant, like, white aggro splashing blue for Time Walk, and then it also goes infinite with Soulfire Grandmaster, and that's a very achievable combo, because both cards are good in their own right, especially Time Walk, obviously, but it's just 6 mana, and for that, you get infinite turns. Are you kidding me? How is that allowed? Someone's got to ban that. Yeah, great card. And not enough things could ever be said about Time Walk. But it's still not number 1. Number 4 on the list is Mox Sapphire. So, it's the number 1 Mox. Blue is just the best color by quite a lot in Vintage Cube. That's no secret to anyone. Blue also uses Moxen very well because they have so much card draw and such bad acceleration. So, yeah, I mean, I just love Mox Sapphire, and I'll always take it if I can, pretty much. Goes in any deck. Just awesome. Also, particularly good mono blue artifacts, which is a big deck that a lot of these cards fit in well for. The fact that it just enables, like, earlier Tinkers, makes Tellurian Academy better. You have 2 different ways to tap it for blue if you have Urza. Just lots of great combos with it. So I love Mox Sapphire, and I love leading drafts with it. Next up, the number 1 colored spell, Ancestral Recall. The one sort of counter, like, it's just not, it's a bit of a letdown to do a draft like this and just end with such predictable things. Like, everyone knew Ancestral was going to be in the top 3. I mean, I guess the exact order can be interesting, but I put Ancestral Recall at 3rd. There's even an argument that it should be number 1 for sure, but I just think it's so good. It's so efficient. Again, like I said earlier when I was talking about Mystic Confluence, 5 mana instant draw 3 is reasonable. And this is 1 mana instant draw 3. And it even has very, very marginal upside of being able to make your opponent draw 3. That can matter sometimes if you're trying to mill them out or something. But it's just so efficient, so powerful, so splashable. I mean, there's no real point in going on about Ancestral because everyone knows how good it is. So without further ado, I'll move on to the best card in the history of Magic, Black Lotus. Black Lotus is at its best in Storm. So if you are a big Storm drafter or if you're very good at it, maybe Black Lotus should be number 1. But even outside of Storm, it is just busted. Like, if you can just play turn 1 Black Lotus and have 4 mana on turn 1, pretty much any deck, any color combination can have a 4 mana card that will just end the game if it just snowballs that quickly. Like, I mean, just going through every color. Turn 1, Plains, Black Lotus, Hero Bladehold, kill them in 2 turns. Turn 1, Island, Black Lotus, Jace the Mind Sculptor, infinite card draw, and you can bounce all their plays. Turn 1, Mountain, Black Lotus, Koth. This actually happened, or it was turn 2 when this really got me, but in one of my recent drafts I lost despite having a busted draw with a turn 3 Wormcoil Engine because they played a turn 2 Black Lotus into Koth and then ultimate Koth. So yeah, I mean, that's another example. Green is definitely not the best Black Lotus deck, but it's still pretty busted. I mean, if you just go turn 1 Forest, Black Lotus, Garruk, Wildspeaker, then you just have an extra 2 mana every single turn for the whole game, or a lot of beasts, or like, I mean, you can just play turn 5 Crater Hoof and not have to tap any of your creatures, so you can just send everything. Like, it's definitely at its worst in green decks, but it's still amazing. And then black, I mean, not even counting Storm, you can just go. Actually, on one of my coaching lessons with someone, with Billy, we had a really, really sweet reanimated deck with Black Lotus, and in one game we went turn 1 Swamp, Black Lotus, Entomb, Necromancy to put turn 1 Grave Titan into play, and that's turn 2 Clock. So I actually think Reanimator is one of the best decks for using Black Lotus, especially if you get Grizzle Brand, because it can enable a very fast Grizzle Brand, but even if you don't have it in your opener, you get the Grizzle Brand in play, draw 7, play Black Lotus, and you can make use of the cards immediately, which is much, much more powerful than just passing, going to discard, and your opponent having a chance to interact. Number 1, not a surprise to anyone, Sol Ring. Again, there's arguments for any of the top 3. I do think Sol Ring is just better than Mox Sapphire or any of the other cards in this list, but Sol Ring, I think, does deserve the number 1 slot. It's just so good in any deck. There's literally no downside. The turn you play it, it accelerates you, and then from every single turn after that, it's card advantage by providing 2 lands worth of mana for one thing. It's tempo advantage. It's repeatable. Again, no downside. It is just the cream of the crop, and I will never, ever pass a Sol Ring for anything. Actually, I shouldn't quite say that. I can imagine some sort of decks where I would take other stuff, but pack 1, pick 1. I'll certainly take Sol Ring over anything. It's just so good. Great in any deck. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's definitely worse than green, as with all of these fast mana cards, because that is sort of the reason to play green in the first place. So, yeah, it's just a little bit redundant with that, but it's still good. I mean, it's better than anything. People say Derogatory Speaker is the green Sol Ring, and even with the creature synergies, Sol Ring is better. But it's probably at its best in blue, but there's just, you see a Sol Ring, you take a Sol Ring. That's pretty much just how it goes. Yeah. So, that's the top 50 cards with some honorable mentions. I hope you enjoyed this video, and definitely let me know in the comments if there's any cards you think I left out that should have been in there, or any cards that you think I just, I switched the order on. Like, if you're contesting 13 versus 14, that's not super exciting. I guess one slot among the top cards is sort of interesting to discuss, but, like, there's sort of a lot of hand-waving here. Like, it's really hard to say between 50 and 49. But definitely just let me know in the comments what you think, if there's anything you really disagree with, or anything you agree with, if you think it's a really helpful video. And also just let me know other things like this that you would enjoy. I'm definitely going to mostly post draft videos as long as I can, but I do think stuff like that can be very interesting. Another one that I am planning on doing right now is going through basically a short primer on each of the different top decks, and sort of the ideal cards I have in them, the cards that look good but are maybe not in the best version. For example, Elves of Deep Shadow and Mono Green. Although most Mono Green decks should play that card for sure. Don't start cutting that from your green decks normally. I'm just talking about the absolute best green decks. So that's a video I'm planning on making in the next couple days. But definitely let me know if there's another idea for something like this that you would like. And again, thank you for watching. I had a lot of fun going through this. Let me know what you think, and see you next time.